Hello, welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be using oil pastels again. I'm just using the Faber-Castell brand and starting with a graphite pencil sketch. So getting started, we're going to go in with our darkest color, which I actually am going to use just a little bit of black. And you really want to find the darkest places in your reference photo and don't be overzealous. You can always add more, but it's nearly impossible to lighten up an area that you've already put black on. Next, you're going to go in with your second darkest color, which for me is a really dark navy blue, and get the next darkest areas in your reference photo. Again, being sparing because you can always darken these places up more later. So in this first layer, I'm really focusing on just getting the color blocking down. I did mix in with the black right here, but for the most part, you just want to get the color down first before you do any blending. And this is where a very detailed sketch to start out with will really help you. By marking out not only those main details, like say the pupil, also mapping out the areas of shadow will help you get a more accurate end result. So I'm just going in with lighter and lighter shades of blue, saving the lightest areas for yellow and green because I'm going to transition into those colors later. Remember, you don't have to press too hard on this first layer. You really just want to map out where that color is going. Sorry, I had to flip it upside down on you there, but I am just outlining the face with the black pastel because the background on this piece is going to be black. Otherwise, I would do it with whatever color the background was. So now that we have our basic color mapping down, you can go in with a little bit more pressure and start to get those more opaque colors. I'm not doing too much blending yet, but I am doing a little bit of blending in between the colors as well. Now, one of the things that can be really frustrating when working with oil pastels are those little specks of pastel that get everywhere and that can smear around. So I just make it part of my workflow to keep a large fluffy brush around and just constantly stay brushing those little flecks off so that I can reduce the amount of smears I get at least. Now I'm going to go in with quite a bit more pressure so that I really get a solid layer of pigment on the paper. And this is really what allows you to do soft blending later on. So now I'm going to go with my next lightest color, and I chose green. I chose blues, greens, and yellows for this piece, partly because I like those shades and I find that they blend well together, and also partly because my oil pastels are kind of old and dry, and I know that these colors work a little bit better than some of the other shades, but you could really use any shades as long as you have a range of values, so you have a really dark color and a really light color. And if you choose something like a really dark red and a really light green, you know, it may not work out as well. You really want to choose colors that go well together. So again, here I started by lightly mapping out the green, and then I'm going in with a lot more pressure on a second line. Don't forget to keep brushing those little flecks out of your workspace. Another tip that I swear by is keeping a little scraper around, not only for adding highlights, but you can also kind of erase your mistakes. Now, it's not a complete fail-safe, but you'll see me use it a little bit more later on, and it does help you get some of the bulk of the color off so that you can go back in with a different color. So now I'm really gonna start going in with a lot of pressure and taking the lighter shades to blend out the darker shades. Basically, you just have to do this over and over again, layer after layer, until you really get the smooth gradient that you want. And this is really all about how you apply your pressure. If you apply too much pressure in just one spot, you'll end up scraping some of the color off. So you apply the color with really hard pressure to get the pigment there, and then when you're blending between colors, sometimes you want to use a little bit lighter pressure and just basically smear the top layer until it gives you the shade that you want. However, if you do go in with really hard pressure when you're blending, like you can see here, I'm really moving the area that the highlight takes up into that green area, really pushing some of that green pigment out of the way because I'm pressing so hard. I actually broke that light yellow pastel right in this moment somewhere. Now you could have used really any shade of yellow, but I did strategically choose this slightly lighter, more pastel yellow because it is taking the place of what would be white on my reference photo. So now that I really have most of the colors mapped out, I'm just going to be going in with different amounts of pressure and different colors, remembering to always use the lighter colors to blend out the darker colors. But this part really just takes a lot of patience, and there's probably going to be a moment where you think this is the worst piece of art that you've ever created, and that there's absolutely no way that you're going to blend these colors together without leaving massive smears. But you really just have to be patient, and it takes some time. But oil pastels can be blended, and like I said earlier, my oil pastels are a little bit old. I've actually had them for probably 6 or 7 years now, so you may even have a little bit easier time blending your colors than I do. I actually cannot blend these colors with my fingers at all. They will just completely rub off the pigment. And if I try to use solvent on some of the lighter colors, it's the same thing. It really will just remove the pigment. That being said, a little bit of solvent, like an odorless mineral spirits or something like that, will help you with some of the darker colors. So I used it on my eyelash area and in my background to help me get a little bit sharper detail on the eyeball. You can also go in with some really sharp colored pencils to help you get some finer details as well. So I mentioned earlier I like to use the scraper to make highlights, which I did on the lips there, but I also like to use it for essentially erasing. So I wasn't quite happy with how far the shading on the cheek extended, like up to her nose area. So I actually ended up using that scraper to scrape off a section of that green ink. That way I could really lighten it up a little bit more than if I tried to just go right on top of that green. And here I'm just pressing really, really hard with that light yellow pastel and pushing some of the green out of the way to get a little bit more defined details around the eye area. This is one way you can get a little bit more fine lines, because that can be kind of difficult when you're working with, you know, big bulky pastels. So one thing that I do is when I am trying to draw a line, I'll draw it with the dark color, but then I'll use the lighter color to really define the shape of that line. So this is what I meant by it's always easier to darken things up later on. I was looking at my reference photo and I felt like the shading around the eye wasn't as dark as I wanted it to be. So I just went in with some of those darker colors and darkened it up a bit. This is why it's so important to just be patient and really use your layers to build detail instead of trying to do all of the detail in your first go. So now I'm just using that scraper to add a little bit of detail to the eyebrow. And then I'm going to go in with a white pastel and lighten up just the lightest areas of the highlights to add a little bit more dimension to that yellow. So now that we're coming up to the end of our painting here, or drawing, whatever you want to call it, this is what I really like to just keep looking back at my reference photo, and sometimes it helps to walk away from your drawing for a little bit and come back and look at it with a fresh pair of eyes. But, you know, just really sharpening up some of those details, some of those areas of shading, just to get it, you know, the closest to realistic that you can get. I'm not really going for super hyper realism here. Obviously, it's green and blue and yellow, but I still want something close to realistic at least. So this is not really an oil pastel tip, But something that I notice a lot of beginners do is forget that the whites of the eye are almost never actually white. So sometimes toning down the white of the eye can actually make it look a lot more realistic. Now, before we go in with the solvent to finish up the background, I just want to say that sometimes you just have to stop. I could have gone on with the shading and the blending forever with this painting, but sometimes you just have to call it the end, you know, and just say you're done, because it's never really completely done. And one thing that I find really helps me close the final chapter on a drawing or a painting is by doing the background. Now, sometimes you might add the background and realize that you don't have enough contrast in your piece. But for me, and especially with this piece, when I added the background, I was like, okay, yeah, you know what? I think I am done with this. And for this background, I just used the tiniest bit of odorless mineral spirits on a brush. I dipped it in and then wiped it off and just helped blend out that black. Like I said earlier, this doesn't work with all of my oil pastels, but it does work with the black. Well, alright guys, that is all I have for today's video, so I hope that you enjoyed this one. And while I'm no professional, I hope that you learned at least something useful from this video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment box. I do leave all of my materials listed in the bio. I have new uploads Wednesdays and Sundays, so hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you!